To work with our templates in Harmony, first we have to go into this project file and see what's going on and make a few alterations to get it cleaned up. So this is a basic character from the waist up. So we have a head with a bunch of pieces that can be manipulated for animation, as well as a torso and arms. And looking at that, you will notice that there is something going on, which is the first set of keyframes all have keyframes marked on them. The second frame does not. Now the second frame, when I advance into that, we will see that is a profile where the first frame is a front view. What we are going to do here is create a character that we have these different views. We can bring all of this artwork then into our scene file so that it's ready to animate and will contain all of the content that we need to do so, which is kind of handy. So that's why we set up these different views here. There's a couple of different possible ways that we can create these template files and bring them into other scenes, but we're going to just be primarily exploring one during this session. So one of the things that we want to do is to set up keyframes for the positions and relationships of all the artwork so that all of my pivot points have been configured for the different layers in the front view, and it has been set up. Now if we notice the back arm here, if we go into the back arm and look at that, here's the upper arm, and I can see it's here in my layer stack, but it is below the body, so it's been brought on top of the body for this particular view, and that was accomplished through nudging. So if we nudge the layer, then that allows us to push that layer back or bring it up front so it's on top of the body, hiding the joint or seam at the shoulder. And if I want to see what's going on with that, let's get the layer properties that don't want to open, but we'll choose them this way. If I look in the layer properties, we can see on the z-axis that it has been moved to the front. So I see where it is now telling me it's 0.001 F, indicating it has now moved in front of the main focal plane, which is established at 0. That's important because when we switch to the profile view, we're going to have to move that arm a little bit because that particular arm, because it got brought to the front, if I were to rotate that arm, I'm going to just turn off animation so it doesn't give me any keyframes right now, and move that arm. We can see that, whoa, and my pivot point's not set, and it's now on top of everything else. So we've got a few problems that we need to address before we take this template file and move it into our project. So all the keyframes were set for everything in the front view, but the profile view needs to have all the keyframes set. So the easy way to go about doing that is to then click on frame 2 and hit F6, function key F6, to then insert a bunch of keyframes for all of the other layers. And now we just need to establish the relationship of their pivot points to their artwork. On some of the layers, the pivot points will remain about the same, and that works. Other ones, ideally, we should make some adjustments to clean things up. When we are going to be taking this grouping of layers that have been connected all to a master peg and creating a template with it so we can use it in other scenes, it's necessary to establish keyframes for all the layers. That helps to migrate over correctly when we go from one project file to another. And if we've established all of the pivot points and everything ahead of time, then when we get this into our projects, we can start animating. And also, because this template I can use in multiple scenes for my project, I want to really have things squared away before I move to the next project file. So this is where we need to take a little bit of time and adjust it. So if I look at the front arm, we can see that it's animating from the back of the shoulder. That's probably not going to be great. I might want to move the arm forward a little bit, but this is where we want to turn on animation to establish the keyframe. So I can now move this arm over, if I click to move the upper arm, I see that the lower arm is on top. So we probably are going to need to adjust that. So before I move the lower arm and nudge it back, I'm going to correct its pivot points. So we'll establish the shoulder for the upper arm back, establish the elbow, and establish the back hand, and get those pivot points set. Now you'll notice those positions really corresponded to the positions of the previous arm. So that's why we now need to establish new keyframes for those. Now, as long as I'm working my way up the list, I can go to the hips and see the hips. That still seems adequate for where the hips are. The neck, that works okay. We'll worry about the rest of the head in a moment, but the main head pivot point probably don't want coming out of the nose. We'll just put that at the base of the head over here. So when I look at the first picture, we can see that the pivot point is there. When I move to the next frame, the pivot point for the head is now here, so that if the head wants to move, well, that's a problem with the hair. We might need to address something with the hair or change the artwork on the neck to line things up appropriately. And moving up, let's see the body. That works okay for the body. And now continuing up the chain for the front hand. Can now move the front hand pivot point over to the wrist, to the elbow, and to the shoulder. Now that I've put it there, what I really want to do is take the back arm. I'm going to rotate the back arm right now just so that once I move it, I can see where things are. And I'm going to just adjust it over a little bit to what feels a little bit more anatomically natural with it, so it doesn't look like he's completely pulling his shoulders back, trying to puff out his chest. With the back arm here in space, if we remember the rules for nudging, I select the layer in the timeline, move my cursor into the camera view so it gets the red frame around it, and now holding down the Option key, I look at the up and down arrows and decide if I'm trying to push something closer to me or further away from me. So if I look at it as if it's a top view, then the up arrow is going to push it away from me, and now we can see how that arm has now indeed moved back. And now once I've done that, I can just rotate the arm back into a little more natural position. Now if I go to the front arm, we can decide if we want to rotate it at all, and I'm going to leave it about here, but I do want to, on the front arm, relocate it a little bit again for that posture's sake. So now we have the two views, and the pivot points for all of the body parts have been arranged. Now we have to go through and look at what is happening with the head. And on the head, we can see the hair up front. We can adjust its pivot point. And it really depends on if and how we plan to animate it for where we would want the hair. Now I move down into the ear, and we can see that the ear's pivot point is corresponding to where it was when the ear was on the side of the head. So we do need to move that pivot point over. Even if we're not going to animate it, it just makes sense to have things lined up. Now this is the back ear. We can just move that pivot point over. If I turn off the head, we might be able to see where the back ear is located at that point. And now the front eye is sitting here. We can probably locate there. The back eye is sitting pretty much where the front eye is, the nose, in case he wants to move or wiggle his nose. I'm going to just put the point down here. And the side mouth, that one was arranged. The mouth front doesn't matter from this view. And then head is still where that was. So we're in good shape. Now, one thing we will notice is that in this side view, that the back ear, we don't see any artwork showing, the same way that we don't see the back eye showing when we're in the side view of the body. So it's been repositioned and already nudged to be back, or just been moved, one of the two. So it looks like our parts are relatively set up. Now, to continue with looking at the character here, we'll also notice that on the character he has two mouth layers. He has a front mouth and a side mouth layer. And what that allows us to do is to set up the drawings so that we have all of the different mouth shapes available for the character. So I have the A mouth shape, B, C. Let me turn off strokes here. So we can see as you go through. Now, you'll also notice how in the front view, I took care to keep the teeth the same, so it looks like they're attached to the head. So if you watch the animation happen, it becomes a much more believable, though it looks like I might have needed to color one more tooth right there. Or color these, not tooth color. To go from our character into a template file that we can use in multiple scenes, we need to first add to Harmony a new library. Now, the way that I've already added a library here, and I'm going to pause for a moment. Harmony, if we look at our library tab, we will see where by default it says symbols, and then it will say the program folder Harmony Essentials. What we want to do is add an additional library to our Harmony so it has access to it. Now, instead of calling it a library, if I say I want to have access to another folder, that would make more sense. Harmony is calling it a library. So if I right-click down in this window, we see we have option to open a library. So I choose Open Library, and I get to choose what library. Now, the library I want to open is going to be the folder we're working in right now, but you can choose any folder, or you could just choose the desktop. Doesn't really matter. But I'm going to choose the folder that I'm working in. Now, after I have done that, we will see that it added that folder to the window, but it has an interesting icon on it. It has a little lock icon. The lock icon tells us that while we can see this now and I can see what's inside it, I can't do anything with it. So what we have to do is ask Harmony's permission, and to do that, I right-click on that folder and I choose Write to Modify. So it's setting it up to try to prevent us from doing something that we don't necessarily want to do accidentally. It makes everything we do very intentional because I have to choose to have the right to modify that folder. And it's something that if you quit and then you relaunch, you have to say right to modify again. So every time you open the program, it questions your right to modify to try to keep assets safe so that you are intentional about what you are accessing. So now that I've done that, I can see that folder that I'm working with that I have added as a library to my project. The next thing that I do is inside my timeline, I grab my master peg layer and I drag that over to my library window. And when I do that, it prompts me to enter in a name. Now I am going to refer to this as Kai front side because this particular template has a front and side view for my character. Now I hit OK, and there it is. So now I've created this template library object. If I go to the desktop and look at that folder, I will see there is now a folder called kaifrontside.tpl. It's my template. It looks the same as any other Harmony file looks, but I can now bring it into any other project that I wish to have access to it. So I'm now going to save Kai in his cleaned up glory, and we'll open up my room. We're going to add Kai to that project. My project open, I can see there is now that library I've added, but I don't see my template until I click on the folder and then look, hey look, there's my template. So if I want to add Kai to this project, I can now drag him over and it adds him to the project. This character in our scene, now that I've brought in a front and a side view of my character, I have two keyframes that are ready to go and ready to work with. So if I want to walk my character, I can start walking him in, I can reposition, I can do whatever I want. Because one frame of time is so short, if you were to now take this particular view of the character and position it somewhere well off screen, go into frame 2, position this character somewhere way off screen, because, and this is why I'm recommending this, this now gives you a base starting front and side view of the character. So once you start moving them, scaling, animating, adjusting, doing all kinds of things to this character, if you want to go back to a clean, fresh start, you have a keyframe with that information. Because now if I go to frame 3, I'm just going to extend out my character, function key F5. So now if I go to frame 3 and look at my character and go, whoa, he's got the double mouth going on. That's super creepy. We need to fix that. We need to do some other things. Okay, that's fine. So I can hit F6, insert my keyframe, go into the head. Let's take a look and see what's going on here. Well, for the side view, I probably don't want my mouth frame showing anymore. So I can now, before I do anything, I'm going to click here and hit function key F6 so I have my keyframes ready to go. Take the mouth keyframe from the front and move it in the library down to nothing so it doesn't show any of those beautiful mouths. So now it's gone. So now we just have the side view. In frame 3, I've set it up so that the front mouth is not showing. If I want the front mouth to show, I can pull it back later by at whatever frame I'm on, I can insert a keyframe and then change it to a new drawing. So we could say, hey, I want to be that one. But right now we don't want anything to show up there. So now I have a character that I can do something with. I can animate it and adjust it into my scene. With the character in the scene, the next thing that we can do is start animating. Remembering that I have a stock front, stock side view, now I can move into the side view I wish to animate. Before I do that, I want to modify the overall relationship of things in my scene. So if I look at this from a top-down view, I can see where I have the wall, the table, and my character, and they're all existing in the same picture plane. The first thing I want to do is to maintain size and push that wall back. So if I grab the maintain size tool with the wall layer selected, I can now push that back in space to create a deeper sense of space that I can move my character into. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is go to my table and push that back, but without maintain size, just with the scale tool. So I can push it back a little bit of maintain size. I don't want it to get too small. And that now gives me some space between where the table, the wall, and the picture plane is to bring in my character. If I look at my character exists here. So now if I push him over and back, we can see how he starts to work into the scene. And then I want to take the table and pull it down a little bit. Height-wise, that kind of makes more sense. So now I'm starting to establish an overall relationship of objects within my scene, and I can start animating as needed. Because I've created this scene where the next thing to add into it would be a camera. If we have a camera, it's worthless unless we attach a peg to it. So I added a camera layer, and then I go on with it selected, choose add peg. That allows me to then, with the camera layer, I can even go to frame 1, hit F6, go to the next frame, and now if I take this camera, start moving it, we'll see how the objects move in parallax with each other. So we can see as the camera has moved over a little bit. And now I can start animating my character, animate the camera, and do all those things that we've done previously. With my scene, if I want to modify it a little bit so that I don't have a single character but have more than one character, I'm going to just rename this master peg here. This will be my first character, Kai. My second character that I now want to bring in, I can drag into my stage and put that character out. We'll see now it's rename that. Well, I have to be real careful what I'm grabbing when I move it and which tool I'm using to move it as well, because that kind of got a little bit messy there. So if I were to grab the peg, that's going to work much better for moving that character.
I cannot take that guy.
Second character has a given name of Vickers, and these are coming from the source script that will be part of the dialogue that will be used in a little bit as this project rolls forward. So with this character, the second character, if I want to color it into a different color, we can do so, but we do have to be aware that when I look at this, the way that Harmony treats colors is it tries to protect any colors you use. When you assign a color to a shape, that color has an ID number associated with it. So if I change that color that I'm using, it will change it across my whole project. So when I look at Kai, we can see that he has these colors that are associated. So if I go into his skin and change his skin tone, we can see that both characters are being affected by that because that color is now associated with that section of the character.
Does that mean?
Well, we can have our different scene palettes. I can duplicate so then I have the same name things. We can also clone a palette. And now if I go into this clone and change the color, let's get something
Green.
very different. So we can see that it's not being applied unless we take and selector option here of move up and move up again, it's now applied that new palette to both of these. So the advantage of a cloned palette is we could have, say, a day palette and a night palette for a given character, and then in a single scene we can change which one we want to be showing. But the key thing to remember is it's whichever one is listed first in our scene palettes. So if I move this one down so the original Kai is on top, it's there. Now if I go into the Vickers palette and start assigning those colors, so let's see, I had the pink skin, so I'll grab pink, grab my paint bucket. So now on this particular character, if I think that would be, got to choose the arm, so now I can color it. And if I work my way down,
Yeah, you have to color everything.
so I have to manually recolor each one of these elements, which if I don't have a ton of artwork, it's not a big deal.
It's just
But if I have a lot of layers and a lot of intricate layers, then it could become problematic to make those changes. So we're going to leave the head for now in the interest of time. But you could go through and color what's going on. Now we can see that affected the front view, but it did not affect the side view of the scene. Gotta turn off the body here for a moment. All right, so that gives some differentiation between the two characters. Let's get his body back on so that we can see what is happening with the characters in our scene. You need to extend Vickers out the rest of the way here. So I'll extend them out. We can see that now that requires us to work on what is happening with the exposure of the mouths, because we have the double mouth syndrome going on again. So if I go into his head, don't need to have the arms. We're on the side view of the mouth. So the front view, go into the library and set it to nothing, and it goes away. Now, what I can also do is insert a new keyframe here for Mr. Vickers, and if I grab the transform tool, then I can flip him over so that he's now talking to his friend. I can go into my top view and then grab my and push him back in space so they're approximately the same size. Maybe he's going to be a little bit shorter. So he's going to be here while we have Kai, who is going to start off screen and enter into my scene. So now I'm ready to start animating. Kai's going to enter, then they're going to have a nice little conversation. I'll do some cuts with the camera, close-ups on one face or the other while they're talking, so we can work back and forth with that dialogue and make that happen. Have them rotate to the front a few times so we can set all of that up. To bring my audio into the project, I'm going to go under File, choose Import. I can choose Sound. This is one way I can do it, and this time I'm going to bring in I'll bring in Kai as a WAV file. Now the other option is I can click on the plus over here. We see sound is in my layers. I can choose that. and it imported a sound element. It gives a generic sound layer. We don't want that. Let's go bring in the other sound. This time we'll bring in our second character. We've brought in the second character. So now we have our two characters existing in our project. Now if I look at the project, I'll see that the wave file continues quite a bit beyond where my current timeline is. We could do the math and figure out how far we need to go. We could look in our sound file and determine its overall length and use that as a guide. It's going to be close enough for what that'll give us a starting point. So as we can see, we're not really going to get much of any action occurring until frame 60, so that would be an appropriate time for, say, one of the characters to walk in, which also fits within the script, which began with that Kai enters and approaches Vickers, which is our story that we have working. So once the character comes in, then we can figure out what's happening and how to animate them. But before I get them walking, because honestly it's fairly easy to work with the mouth. Now we can see that the mouths at the end are having some exposure issues going on there because the layers have been extended out. They're both on the profile view, and if we look at the characters, now we have the mouth. So we need to just, for now, tell the mouth view, the front in library, to go to the empty frame for each one of our characters. And then that cleans up what's happening with the mouth. Now that we've brought them in, what we can do is we can even just start looking at some basic simple lip syncing with it. So if I go to the Kai sound, choose lip sync, auto lip sync detection, it analyzes the sound. But technically it usually does that upon import, but it's a good practice just to do that. And now what I'm going to do is choose lip sync, map lip sync. Now as I look through the layers, we'll see that we have a whole bunch of layers. All the -1 is because the second version of the character we brought in, it added a _1 to each of the layer names. Now as I look through here, we will see that we have both front and side options. So I'll choose side and hit OK. And now if we go through, we can see, just turn off scrubbing for now, how the mouth is changing and talking. Now if I go into the same sound, we can also look down in the timeline and see how it is mapping that sound out. If we do switch our character to the front view, we will need to repeat the process for the mouth front as well. And we can see how that now put it in. So we do have both mouths talking in the scary two-mouthed exposure. So we won't, if we do that now, then we'll just want to clear out those frames as necessary or add in frames when we need that exposure to happen. But for now, we'll leave that off. To repeat the same process on Kai, Vickers, go to the Vickers layer, auto lip sync detection, and then map to lip sync. This time we know it's the _1 mouth side layer, so I'll choose that. Hit OK. And now we can see that character is speaking. So now we have two characters speaking based on the audio that we brought in. If I want to merge my character into my scene, well, I probably first want to take my Vickers character here and position him not on screen. So I'll get him out of the way. Out of the way. With the first frames moved off, now I'm going to go grab Vickers and move Vickers off stage here a little bit. And as we're going to work the scene, I want Kai to start walking in. So from this pose, I can switch then to my transform tool and not dislocate his arm, but bring his arm back a little bit. And then rotate the front arm or the back arm forward. Now if I go to the next frame for Kai and hit F6 and then flip the arms, do it again. You can see how we have a little arm motion, so it's just kind of doing a little bit of walking. Now with this position, click on the frame which chooses the whole peg. Can move him over with how much I anticipate one step is going to be. Now if we space that out a little bit, it starts to appear that he's walking. Now what we can also do is pull that midpoint up a little bit so that as he walks, you start to get a little bit of that rise and fall of the step, even if we can't see the legs. So that gives the starting point of the animation.